Hello, welcome to the National Botanic Garden of Wales. My name is Bruce Langridge. I'm the head of interpretation here, and you've just entered the biggest single span glasshouse in the whole world. Now I'm going to be telling you today about the plants that grow in this glasshouse, but first I think I need to show you a map, so let's come over here with me. So the plants here grow in what we call the Mediterranean climate zones of the world. It's not a very catchy title, it's not like desert or jungle, but the Mediterranean climate zones are just as important as the tropical rainforests of the world. So why is that? Well, they occupy less than 2% of the world's landmass, but they have within them over 20% of all plant species. That's amazing, isn't it? So where is that? So we're looking at the southwest area of Australia, and a little bit over here as well. We're looking at the Cape on South Africa. We're looking at the Mediterranean basin, the most of Chile, and the coastal area of California, and just a little bit of the Canary Islands. And what unites them is a climate of hot, dry summers, cool, moist winters, and a kind of like persistent sort of breeze. And these create conditions which are fairly infertile, and where places are infertile, that's often where you get greater plant diversity. And we've divided our great glasshouse into these different geographical areas. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to walk through each one of these areas, and I'm going to be talking about the plants that you can find as you walk through. Okay, so we're going to start our tour today in Western Australia. Now the area with the Mediterranean climate zone in Australia is kind of, it's kind of in the Western Australia, kind of around the area of Perth and the southwest area beneath that, and also areas around Adelaide. This area has an astonishing 8,000 different plant species growing in it. Now, if you think in Britain, we have something like 1,700 different plant species, just gives you a bit of an idea. But 75% of all those plant species that grow in Western Australia grow nowhere else on Earth. So they're specially adapted, specially evolved for that area. And they grow on a kind of habitat that they call the quangan. And it's kind of dry. Again, just think about the climate that you get in these Mediterranean zones. So it's a hot, dry summer, cool, moist winters, and it's typified by kind of a lot of bare land, because it often has fires raging through it. And a lot of these plants here are especially adapted to fire, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And you'll see plants here that have structures that you just do not see in Britain. So just follow me through. Okay, I'm just going to start off with this slightly innocuous looking bush here. It's called a Gravilla. I'm just going to check the label here, because this is one thing we have. All our plants have these, they have plant labels. Gravilla Levis. And you'll see on this plant label here, it's something called a Proteaceae. And that's a name that's going to resonate a little bit throughout our walk today. The thing that I find really distinctive with this one is its leaves, which kind of like evolved this very tough toughness to them, and it's like handling chicken wire. It's really, really nasty. So that is obviously trying to put off predators. Let's just bear this in mind, Gravilla Levis. There's an awful lot of plants here which are kind of related. We tend to give them a broader name called Bottlebrush. The flowers have gone over a little bit, but this is something called a scarlet honey myrtle. They've all got very odd flowers, but they're kind of called bottlebrush because their flowers look like kind of bottlebrush. There are about at least 110 different types of this type of honey myrtle, and they're very distinctive because some of them have very odd smells, but they all end up producing a very hard cone, and we'll see if we can find a hard cone later. The most distinctive plants you get in this area is something called a grass tree, which is this thing here. Now, it's neither a tree nor it's a grass. Its Latin name is Xanthoria, and it's actually a member of the lily family, but it's really well adapted to the burning that you get on these sort of landscapes. So again, with these hot, dry summers, you often get, with the impact of lightning that forms after a hot, dry summer, it often creates fires, and these fires race through the landscape and all the burning everything as it goes. But a lot of these plants are really well adapted to this. So the grass tree, for instance, it has these big thick trunks inside here, and lots of little animals and insects get inside there because it gives them protection. But for this to actually produce a flower, it actually needs the action of smoke to help the pollination process. And in this botanic garden here, we've been open since the year 2000, and it was only 4 years ago that our grass trees started to throw up big flower heads. And they're huge white spikes, went up about 12 foot high. And it happened after we had that really hot summer, what was that, about 3 years ago, when in here it got to over 40 degrees. It was so hot that visitors were coming in and just leaving again. But maybe because of that, and somehow or other, they ended up throwing up these huge flower spikes. And we had them again last year, because again there was another big hot summer here. And maybe our own climate change is actually helping these to actually flower here. So there are over 1,000 different taxa of plants in this great glasshouse. Now if you think of a taxa as almost like a different species or a different variety, that's an awful lot to get your head around, and very hard to actually get to know each one. Occasionally some of them catch your eye. This one has just recently caught my eye, and it's another Gravilla. So remember that little white flower thing with the chicken wire that we found at the start? That was a type of Gravilla. This is a completely different one. It's just called Gravilla Red Hood. And I think it was only introduced here last year. It's already starting to make a big impact. A tree you've probably heard of is a Eucalyptus. You often get it in health food shops, sort of clears the sinuses and so on, if you smell that. But Eucalyptus is an important tree in Australia. You get many different types, and you get some eucalyptus trees which are associated with the Mediterranean climate zones. This one called Eucalyptus forestiana. What is distinctive about a lot of the eucalyptus trees there is they kind of form forests, and they give off this oil. So this oil, it's almost like the sweatless oil. And when the forest fires come through, the oils kind of explode. They accelerate the fire. So what it allows them to, it's kind of accepting of the fire, but the fire then, if it explodes because the oil's in this, it means it moves through much quicker, and it doesn't tend to damage the roots of the eucalyptus tree, which can then grow up again. Now, this is quite a new sort of eucalyptus tree that we get in the Great Glass House. It's because they also grow very, very fast. And Botanic Garden has been open now for 21 years. And in that time, I've seen quite a few eucalyptus trees grow very, very fast, hit the top of the roof here, and then they have to be taken down again. They can't be pruned, and we just have to replant them. But occasionally they have some really amazing sort of like seeds which kind of explode themselves. Very rare to see that, but they're a very interesting tree. We saw earlier a plant called the Melaleuca, which is which was kind of a bottlebrush. Now there are other types of bottlebrush, and Banksias are a really fascinating type of bottlebrush tree. And we've got a lot of them here, and they have their flowers come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. This is called Banksia integrifolia. So we kind of see this there's a plant forming here. This plant will evolve into a very hard cone, which when the fires come through the Kwongan region, this habitat which you get in the southwest of Australia, it takes the heat of the fire to for the cone, the wooden cone that forms from this, to actually release its seeds. It's kind of adapted for the hot fires there. And we'll see a couple of other examples of cones in a minute. But just whilst I'm here as well, we are of course in Australia. So we've had a member of one of our visitors once came here and said what you really need is a didgeridoo. So he gave us this didgeridoo here, don't know if you can see it, which is absolutely great. And I did think about displaying it so people could have a go, but of course in times of COVID that is like just really bad thing to do. So I've had to put the didgeridoo up the tree, and unfortunately I'll give you a demonstration, but it's stuck to the tree right now, but I'm sure you can imagine it. But if you also see down here, you'll see Aboriginal art. And what we're trying to do in the Great Glass House is to try and show our visitors the different cultures associated with all these different Mediterranean climate regions. And in southwest Australia, there's a particular Aboriginal tribe called the Noongar in Australia. Okay, so we just looked at Banksia integrifolia. This is Banksia. Oh, I've got to get this right here. Banksia blecnifolia, and as you can see, the flower on here is pretty weird. Kind of forming a distinctive, again thinking of the word bottlebrush. So this is one of the stages of it, but when it gets much older, it forms this stage here. So it kind of expands, and this then forms into a woody cone. And what's interesting about this, for me, I'm a bit of a plant geek, and in Britain we get something called a hard fern, and its Latin name is Blechnum spicant, and it looks like this, and it's very hard. And if you look at the Latin name of this plant here, it's Banksia blecnifolia. So obviously the two things are related. But the other interesting thing from this is the name Banksia, because the whole of these bottlebrush plants, they're named after Joseph Banks, who was the botanist who went with Captain Cook when the British sailed over and did what they said discovered Australia. Clearly they didn't, because people have been living in Australia for tens of thousands of years, but for them they kind of discovered it. And Joseph Banks, as the botanist on board the ship, he discovered loads of different plants there, and his name lives on with this today. The other interesting thing with this is the name of the plant family here, and it's a Proteaceae. So again, we heard the word Proteaceae before, and it's just a name I just want you to bear in mind. We found it on the Gravilla before, we've now found it on the Banksia, so let's just bear in mind Proteaceae as we go along. I normally take people on a walk around the Great Glass House. I kind of get them to tell me the name of a plant that they never heard of before, but somehow or other they know the name of. That's a bit of a strange thing to say. I'm going to try that on you right now, okay? So, think about what is a really distinctive animal of Australia. I'm not talking koala bears. What else can we think of? Are emus in Australia? I tend to think of a kangaroo. And there are obviously many different types of kangaroo. And this plant is indeed named after a kangaroo. So, halfway there. Now if you look at the weird flowers of this, the plant itself in Latin is called Inigo xanthos, so that's not going to help you too much. But if you look closely at this wonderful flower, kind of multicoloured weird flower, very, very furry, can you see what sort of bit of the kangaroo that reminds you of? It's not its head, probably not its legs, but it's its paws, little hands like that. And this is indeed called the kangaroo paw. And we have lots of different types of kangaroo paw taxa in this Great Glass House. We've looked at the larger bit of the Western Australian display. Now we're going to go and have a look at Chile, and we're going to go across this bridge to do so. So follow me. I'm just going to mention this en route because we work with some very skilled horticulturalists here. And this plant here, I've got to read out the plant label for this, it's the Hardenbergia violacea, so you can see the violet sort of name. But this apparently is very, very hard to grow. but our horticulturists have been growing it here now for 20 years, so they know what they're doing. I haven't have a clue.